Many organizations spend more time and energy on external communications than internal ones. In this episode, how your internal strategy can reduce email, save time, and create space for innovation and insight. This is Coaching for Leaders, episode 687.
Produced by Innovate Learning, maximizing human potential.
Greetings to you from Orange County, California. This is Coaching for Leaders, and I'm your host, Dave Stachowiak. Leaders aren't born, they're made. And this weekly show helps you discover leadership wisdom through insightful conversations. One of those conversations that almost every leader wants to do a better job having is internal conversations, and specifically internal communication. How can we do a better job of being able to get information flowing about what's happening inside the organization? Almost every organization attempts this in some way, but very few have figured out ways to do this well. Today, I'm so glad to welcome an expert who has helped not only their own organization do this so effectively, but also is a leader in helping other organizations do this well too. I'm so pleased to welcome Roy Schwartz. He is co-founder and CEO at Axios HQ, the world's first AI-powered internal communications management platform. He's also the co-founder of Axios, the award-winning news organization, known for its Smart Brevity writing style. He's the co-author, along with Jim VandeHei and Mike Allen, of Smart Brevity, The Power of Saying More with Less. Roy, pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
This is such a challenging problem for so many leaders and organizations. We spend a lot of time thinking about getting our message out into the world, marketing, sales, all those things. But when it comes to internal communications, so many organizations really do struggle with this, don't they?
Oh, absolutely. What's really interesting to me is I have an MBA. I went to business school at University of Maryland, and they taught me how to do spreadsheets and PowerPoint presentations. But not once did anyone share with me, how do I write an email to all of my team, to all of my staff? And so a lot of people, even very successful executives, struggle with how do you communicate effectively?
You write along with Jim and Mike in the book that this has also been a struggle for you all along the way. And I'm quoting you, "There's another thing we learned the hard way. At Politico in our early days, we scoffed at communications and culture and figured everything would be fine if people just did their jobs. We were dead wrong." What was it that you ended up being wrong about?
You can't talk about your mission, vision, culture enough. It really has to become something that you feel as an executive and as a leader that you have over-communicated, and maybe then it has just started to sink in. Those things are so critical to get people aligned. It takes so long for that to sink in. And we thought that we talked about it enough, and we had all-hands meetings, and we talked about culture, and we talked about our mission, but we found out that especially as we grew, we became misaligned. And I would say with COVID and remote work, that has become even more difficult. So this need to communicate effectively is one that I think a lot of leaders are really grasping with right now, because they see the damage of not all being in the same place, not being able to walk by and say hi and talk to people in the office, and trying to get people to do their best work is really difficult if you can't communicate effectively and keep everyone on the same page.
One thing you all have discovered that works at Axios is in-house newsletters. What is it that got you down that path?
So we started using our own tools. So Axios is well known for its newsletters. We write literally dozens of daily newsletters read by millions of people in the news and media space. But we started using them internally as a way to keep all of our executives on the same page. So we started with an all hands. So Jim wrote a weekly newsletter of the top 5 things that people needed to know within Axios. We then followed that by doing one per department. So marketing, sales, finance. And we did that every week, and we shared it amongst the executive team. And what we found was we had a lot fewer issues, especially when it came to alignment and understanding, because we were communicating so effectively. The other thing we did was we put everything in Smart Brevity. So everything was short, everything was concise, everything was in a hierarchical order. And so people could get through that information very quickly and effectively. And what it actually did was cut down on the total number of emails being sent out, because instead from sending out 5, 6, 7 messages, you knew that once a week you were going to get an update with everything you needed to know about marketing, everything you needed to know about sales. And so it actually ended up saving people a lot of time.
That's one of the things I think stops a lot of organizations from thinking about doing a newsletter, internal communication, is there's this assumption, well, people aren't going to read their email. No one wants more messages. It's going to be information overwhelm. But because of the way you've done it, it's actually the opposite. It cuts down on some of that unnecessary communication and email traffic.
It cuts down on that, and it also saves people time. So ultimately, in the beginning, it's going to start, it takes a little time and effort to put things in a hierarchy, to develop a format and a template that is going to resonate. But once you have those down, you end up saving a lot of time and effort, because instead from there being several different emails or several different updates on different initiatives, you can pull them together, you can shorten them, and you can make sure that essential information is shared. We also spend a lot of time thinking about the hierarchy of that information to make sure that people understand what's most important, and we put that at the top of each of these pieces of communication. So I would say I don't love the term newsletter because I feel like it sends negative connotations. It feels dated, but they're updates. They're series. They're updates about different initiatives within an organization or different departments within an organization. The most important one is the all hands. The most important one that any company can send out is from the CEO or from the C-suite to the rest of the organization. And we always advise people to do it at least once a week, even if it's just one item or 2 items, once a week communication, so that people know, hey, every Monday or every Friday, whatever day you end up sending it at this time, I'm going to get a piece of communication. And it actually does a lot for the company, because there's a lot of things that happen and you're almost always instantly thinking, oh, when do I have to communicate about this? But if you have a weekly cadence, it gives you actually some more time to put thought into it and to make sure that your communication is effective, and people aren't expecting it on a Wednesday or a Thursday. They know, hey, every Monday at 9 a.m., I get this piece of communication from the CEO, and that's when this issue is going to be addressed. And so it gives you a little bit more time to plan it and make sure that what you've written is appropriate.
And how interesting that you don't love that term newsletter. I've banned that term in our business because I always have the thought thinking about it from the receiving end, that like no one really ever wants to get a newsletter, because in so many places a newsletter is like information or details from another organization that you don't necessarily want or need. And
That's
so
right.
I think that part of this, as far as mindset, and you all are real intentional about this, is what you call it really matters. And how do you go through the process of deciding what it should be called and making sure that lands well with whoever's going to be reading it?
Yeah, so because we have one for each department, it's very department specific. It has to speak to the content that's going to be in it. And ideally, it gives people a sense of what they're going to open, right? So we have one that's called The Weekend, and we send it out on a Friday, and it basically covers all the things coming up for the following week that we want people to think about before Monday. And so that's the one that we send out. We also have a sales update and an account management update. We want to make sure that whatever is promised in the title, it comes through in what people receive. And then you can have fun with it, right? So I have one that I get every day from my chief of staff, and it's called the Daily Drive. And it's really just my agenda and all the meetings I'm going to have and a little rundown of what each meeting is. But because I'm a car guy, he puts it in the Daily Drive, and he has emojis of different cars in each of the items. And it just keeps things fun and fresh.
Yeah, and having fun is part of this message. And one of the highlights in the book is make me smile in some way when I'm actually going to engage with this or read this. That just brings the human element into this, right?
Absolutely. People should allow their creativity to come through, their personality to come through. These should not be dry. If anything, they should be fun. We use a lot of emojis. Not every company is going to like to do that, but we do it for an element of fun. In our software, we actually, you can hit a button and it will select the subject line for you and it'll put in an emoji. And they tend to be, I would say, pretty fun and on the mark. And we've noticed that you get a 2 to 5% increase in open rates when you generate using AI, you generate the subject line. So it's interesting. You can start to, I don't want to say game the system, but you can improve your open rates based on what you put in the subject line.
Which matters a lot, because if the subject line isn't good, apparent, what I get from reading this message, and I never click on it to open it, then nothing else you do with the communication matters, right?
Oh, I mean, I was the worst at writing subject lines. I have to admit, I used to just, that would be the first thing that I would write. Then I would sit down and write the email, and I didn't go back and change the subject line, and it tended to be boring and really very general. And so, I love AI, like it can be super helpful. And I would start utilizing AI to help you think about the subject lines, because I'd say generally people are not great at coming up with creative and fun ideas. But once you've constructed the email, it's actually very easy for the AI to look at that and say, oh, this is what it's about. This is what will be effective. This will get people's attention. And it's delivering on the promise of what's inside.
I want to ask you more about AI in a few moments, because there's such an important key concept to this, and you all have done some incredible work on this. Before we get there, there's some really interesting benefits that come out of this, other than just people knowing what's going on and also lowering overall email load, communication load. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting, is mentioned a few times in the book, is that when you sit down to have conversations with people and other leaders in the organization, that people are already caught up. So you don't have to spend the time talking about what's happening. You can spend time on the bigger stuff, innovations, disruptions, the kind of stuff that we want to maximize in-person time for.
Absolutely. So I'll just give some examples from my own work. So I have one-on-ones with all of my executive team. I get an update from each executive member before that meeting. It's usually a 2-minute read. I get caught up on all the facts, right? So let's just take sales. I know what the sales pipeline is. I know what we're forecasting. So I don't need to ask those questions. I can get into the strategy. I can get into the insights. And so it makes my one-on-ones much more productive when I've done this 2 or 3 minute read ahead of time, and the person has had to construct their thoughts, right? I think that's the biggest part. That's the secret sauce, really, is that the executive has had to sit down and think about, what am I trying to communicate to Roy? What are the top 5 things I'm working on? What are the updates that I need to give him? And so when I go through it, I can get into the insight from that leader, rather than just the, what are you doing and why is that happening, and just the basics, right? I can go much, much deeper, and I can do it much more effectively. So that's been a huge gain, I think, in terms of writing these pieces of communication. It's organizing your thoughts and getting that communication out there so that people can save time. And eventually you get really good at writing them too. You start to become very quick at writing in Smart Brevity, and it becomes second nature.
You add, for the co-founders, these updates are an early warning system for anyone's activities that might be veering away from the company goals. In one Sunday evening, we can be sure everyone's on track and spot pockets that need our attention, encouragement, or kudos. There's an element here of accountability and recognition in this as well, too.
100%. 100%. You want to be able to, one, make sure your company is aligned. So if you've set your vision and your mission, you've set your goals, you've set your QBRs, and you want to make sure that everything is marching in the right order. And sometimes when you look at those updates and you see that one thing is out of place, it allows you to have a early conversation that says, oh, I thought that would actually be a higher priority for you. Oh, maybe there's a misunderstanding. Maybe there's a miscommunication, and you can set things right before weeks or months go by. And before you know it, you're starting to diverge into 2 different strategies. So I would say it's really essential. And we're very transparent. We share it with the entire executive team. So the updates that I get by department head are actually shared with the entire executive team, so that everyone can see what each other are doing and make sure that there are no misunderstandings in terms of the strategy that we're going with.
For someone who's never thought about doing something like this in their organization, or maybe their organization more broadly does it, but they don't do it for their team necessarily. I'm curious, like, what would be a good starting point? And I'd love to bring AI into this conversation as well, too, because I think what a great tool set we can all use. Everyone's, of course, in a little different place on AI. A lot of people are using it really substantially. A whole bunch of people haven't really dipped their toes in it yet. For someone who's starting off, maybe they've maybe messed around with ChatGPT a little bit, but they haven't really gotten into AI yet. And thinking about putting together a weekly update for my team, what's a good starting point to think of, like, all right, what would I do to be able to just start to draft what that first one looks like?
Yeah, the blank page problem is a real issue. So with Axios HQ, our software, we have about 650 clients that utilize it. And I would say the biggest thing that they're trying to do is they're trying to get an ROI, increase in productivity, increase in employee engagement, some other return from improved communication. But when they sit down, the biggest issue they have is the blank page problem. What should I say? How should I say it? What should be in it? And so our AI, which also actually utilizes OpenAI, allows you to construct your initial template, right? It helps you understand what should be in your initial draft. But if you've never done it before and you don't have Axios HQ and you're just doing it in ChatGPT, you can still get some pretty general feedbacks. It could say, look, I'm writing a new weekly update. I'm in the, let's say, product department. I have 10 employees. I'm trying to keep them updated on these 4 different initiatives. What should I put in my weekly update? And you'd actually be pretty impressed with what comes back. It'll give you the structure of a weekly communication. What are the items you should generally talk about? And then you can fine tune it from there. You can say, okay, that makes sense. I like those 2 or 3. This will be my format. And then you can start to write that weekly update. So I would say keeping things weekly is really important. Some people say, oh, that sounds like a lot. It can be a very short update. And especially before holidays, it could be, hey, just wanted to send you a quick, for Thanksgiving, thanks for everything that you've done. Enjoy spending time with your family. There's no other updates this week. But the cadence is really important. People need to know that you're sending it every week. And what we've seen is you can drive open rates into the 70s and 80s if you have a weekly cadence. In small companies, I would say it's in the 90s.
And for perspective on open rate, a lot of organizations sending out marketing email, if they're getting open rates in that, what would we say, 15 to 20% zone, that would be considered decent, right? So having 70, 80, 90% open rates, people seeing that cadence, that's huge.
Yeah. So it can make a huge difference, because if you think of an organization where 70% of the people have read and understand a weekly piece of content versus an organization where maybe it's sent once a month and only 20 or 30 people open it, that's a huge difference in alignment.
What you call it is important. The subject line is important. And part of the Smart Brevity model is also starting with one big thing, that there's a hierarchy to how things are presented in that communication. How do you think about that, and what and the philosophy behind that?
Yeah, so the insight that led us to that was that when we were at Politico, we noticed that 80% of people stopped reading after the first 250 words. 250 words is roughly what fits on one screen of your phone, and it really can only give you the broad strokes of one thing. And so that's what ultimately led us with this concept of one big thing, is when we realized that people's attention spans were just so short. And that was in news. So that's a little bit different. It's not me opening up my company's newsletter. This is, me gathering news or information from clicking on a link on an article. But it gives you some sense of what people's attention span is. And so we generally advise that you can have up to maybe 5 items in your weekly update, but each item should be no more than 200 or 250 words. And that way, if I'm reading it, if I already know it, I can skip it and go down to the next one. If I haven't read it, I know that I can read it in 30 seconds and get up to speed.
And that 200 words, is the aim to have the key communication in that 200 words, and or is the invitation to get someone to click and to then go to a much more in-depth video update? I'm kind of curious, like, how you think about that as far as internal communication.
So we believe in internal communication to put as much as you can into the document, but have it be the go deeper section. So as an example, if you're doing a weekly update and it has 5 items and you've given a general overview in the one big thing and it's 200 words or so, but there is a go deeper. Let's say it's about vacation policy. Then at that point, you could have a link and then you could say, go deeper, click below to find out more information. Or you could say, go down to the last item and there's more information there about our new vacation policy. So that's a way to have the headline, have everyone understand what's happening. And there's changes to our vacation policy. Great. We're eliminating this day. We're adding this day. That's your one big thing. But then if people want to go deeper and understand, well, what are the other days and what's the vacation policy overall, there's a link to it and they can go deeper if they want it.
And the distinction I'm hearing there is like the headline, the big thing, get that in the communication, especially internally. If people need more, maybe there's a link, but try to keep it as easy as possible so you don't have people having to go and spend time reading if they don't have the time or the bandwidth to do that.
Yeah, so we have the subject line of the update, but then within the update itself, if you've got 4 or 5 items, each item we have its own headline. And that headline should give you what you need to know. Even if you read nothing else, it should be the most essential thing that I'm trying to convey. And then beyond that, they should be able to read. So in the case of a vacation policy, like it would literally say, we are changing the vacation policy. Okay, now I'm going to read that, right? You don't want to bury the headline, right? So the headline is, I've made a change. You should take a look. And now you can go deeper if you want to.
Yeah, and part of the Smart Brevity model is one strong first sentence and then some context as to why it matters, right?
Yeah, the what's new and the why it matters. So we like to think of it as if you and I were sitting down and having a cup of coffee, having a drink, and you asked me, what's going on? And I would tell you what's new, and I would give you the why it matters. I would do it naturally, right? I'd do it within a tone of conversation, and I'd usually lead with the most important thing because I'm trying to get your attention and I'm trying to be interesting. For some reason, when people sit down and write, that's not what they do. They start with context. They start with background. They use words that we would never use in real life, like aforementioned. It doesn't make any sense when you say it out loud, but it is what people do when they start writing for some reason.
Yeah.
I think we were trained in school, right? It was all about length. It was all about using SAT words. It was all about, give me 1,000 words on this topic. And how many of us had to change the line spacing and the margins just in order to make it look like we delivered, 2 pages worth of work when really we were struggling to fill a page. It didn't mean that our writing wasn't good. It just meant that it didn't fulfill some idea of the length that it needed to be. And so unfortunately, those bad habits have been ingrained in us. And now we have to unlearn them because we don't have the time. We need things to be efficient at work. And if you think you're getting a lot of emails now, oh boy, are you in for a surprise? Because unfortunately, because AI makes it so much easier to write content, we are all about to be bombarded. So if the average executive now gets 300 emails a day, don't be surprised if that number jumps to 3,000. It's going to become so much easier to fill your inbox with content. So just treat that as a little forecast of what's to come. But I think we're all in for a rude awakening when it comes to the volume of communication coming our way.
I got the advice a while back to write the way that you talk. And that may not be the way to write if you're working on your doctoral dissertation, right? But in most other contexts, certainly in organizations in our daily life, just stopping and for me, I'd like stop and read it out loud. Like, would I actually talk that way? Like you said, aforementioned, like we all do that to some extent. We all of a sudden these words emerge that years of writing classes have taught us to do. And that's all fine and good for that context. But a lot of times just natural language is so helpful.
100%. Read it out loud. Read it out loud. And if you stop and go, wow, I would never say that. That does not sound right. You have to change it. And so now I do it out of habit, but I would say it took a little practice at first to read everything out loud. And it does help you write the way that you speak, which makes it easier to understand and makes it much more memorable as well.
You hit on this a bit ago of the concept of making people smile. And you mentioned your chief of staff frames things around cars because that's what you love and enjoy reading it, right? The daily drive.
That's right.
And And I'm
You see, you remembered that, right? The
yeah.
daily drive.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Because it's fun.
Exactly. Because it's unique, it's memorable, it connects to a person. And I, I'm curious, like, when you think about making people smile in the terms of the internal communications that go out to a whole bunch of people, what are the kinds of things that people do that really get people smiling, bring in some humor, bring in some personality to these that actually get people to want to read them?
So first, you got to be true to your personality. If you're a fun person, if you start with a joke, then that's natural. If that's not natural for you, then don't fake it. But basically, try and be true to your personality. I think that's important. Two, we actually add a section that we call the one fun thing. That one fun thing can be a drink that you tried, a restaurant that you went to, something that made you smile or made you laugh. And now you can start to bring in things that other people have shared with you, because once you add a one fun thing section, what you'll get is people will write to you and say, "Oh, I did this. I think we should share it with people." And so I'm never at a loss for content on that one because I'm getting advice all the time from my team. I have 130 employees. I usually get at least 2 or 3 emails each week with something interesting that I can add into our weekly updates. So once you start writing, you'll be impressed by how quickly people will start to actually petition you for content. Like, hey, can you please give kudos to this person? Can you please mention that this team did this? Or can you tie this back to the mission of the company? You'll start to get content from other people.
And that means people are reading it and paying attention, right? Which is the aim of this whole thing, is to get that message out there. So cool. We talked about the what everyone can do. There's also a group of folks who are using AI and are looking at tools like yours and thinking, how do we do a better job at really automating more of this, of utilizing the technology well, so that we can spend more time doing the things that the technology can't do. For folks who are looking at a tool like Axios HQ, how are organizations engaging with this right now? And what does it do that I'm not going to sit down, or a team's not going to sit down and be able to do on our own?
So I would say most communication departments don't have a tool at all. So they're band-aiding together Excel spreadsheets, Word documents, MailChimp, Google, several other things that were meant for different uses, but they're trying to make it work in order to organize and manage the different pieces of communication. What we found is that we've understood the workflow of communicators. And so it's everything from planning that communication, collaborating on that communication, getting the approvals that you need before you hit send, scheduling the test send, scheduling the send itself, and then the analytics. Who opened it? When did they open it? And then now we've added ability to deliver the message through Slack, Teams, SharePoint. So you can write it once and then you can share it in multiple different ways. And that is also really important because you've got to meet your audience where they are. Some people love Slack, some people love email, some people love the intranet. You've got to be able to share it into all of those different places so that people can consume it the way that they want.
The book has gotten so much traction. Big congrats to Jim and Mike and you on framing something that's been so helpful to people. I think it just speaks to the need of us all being smart about our communications, being concise, right? And I'm curious, as the book's been out in the world, you've obviously been talking with a lot more people about it now. A lot of other organizations are utilizing this model. I'm wondering what, if anything, you've changed your mind on as people have started engaging with this model even more.
Yeah, the book's been really exciting for us. It has sold 150,000 copies. We sell somewhere around 1,000 or 2,000 copies every week.
Wow.
It seems like people are buying it for their teams because they're usually selling in 5 or 10 books at a time. So it seems like someone's reading it saying, "Oh, I want my team to communicate this way," and then they buy it for the rest of their team. So that's been fantastic. I would say in terms of things that maybe we would rewrite or redo, I think that a lot of people, it came across as being impersonal, that brief meant not putting in your personality. And I think although we talk about it in the book, I think we could have done a better job of giving examples of how you can bring your personality into it, how you can make it more fun, and how even though it's brief, it doesn't necessarily always mean short, and it doesn't necessarily always mean to the point and with no personality. And so I think that's the part that I've had to explain the most as people have asked me questions about the book. They don't want to lose their personality. They don't want to seem robotic. And that's very, very far from what we're actually trying to convey. We want eventually for your personality and for the person writing it to become this celebrity almost within the organization, that people are petitioning for different updates and trying to get their update into the weekly all hands, and that person can put it into their voice and make it exciting.
Roy Schwartz is the co-author of Smart Brevity, The Power of Saying More with Less. Roy, thank you so much for your time and your work.
Oh, thank you.
If this conversation was helpful, 3 related episodes I'd recommend to you. One of them is episode 518, The Way to Make Sense to Others. Tom Henschel was my guest on that episode, the host of the Look and Sound of Leadership podcast, dear friend of mine. Tom and I talked about how do we actually do a better job verbally of some of the things we talked about today in our communications, how to be more concise, how to make sure it lands well. Tom talks through his fabulous model on sorting and labeling in that episode, step by step of exactly how to make sense to others. Episode 518 for that. Also recommended episode 651, Getting Better at Reading the Room. Kirsten Ferguson was my guest on that episode. We talked about both literally and figuratively needing to read the room. Leaders need to do that all the time. We have all missed that. We have all seen other people miss it. We talk about how to get better at both aspects of it in episode 651, a good complement to this conversation. And then finally, I'd recommend episode 666, Get People Reading What You're Sending. Todd Rogers and his work at Harvard, the excellent book, Writing for Busy Readers. We get into a lot more of the tactics of actually how to get more concise in your writing. We talked about the big picture today, strategy on internal communications, how to position that. In episode 666, we get much more into the tactical, actually. How do you really write in a way that is more concise? Todd and I go through some great detail on that. I think you'll find it a good complement to this conversation. All of those episodes, of course, you can find on the coachingforleaders.com website. I'm inviting you today to set up your free membership. It's going to give you access to the entire library that I've aired since 2011, searchable by topic. And one of the benefits that you receive as part of your free membership is the weekly leadership guide. It's one email I send out each week with exactly what we talked about today. A couple of key bullet points from every episode, the related episodes that I just mentioned, usually 1 or 2 articles, videos, other podcast episodes I found during the week that I think you should be paying attention to, and usually a quote. A short quote from one of our past guests, their books, and reminding us of the things that we've heard on the podcast previously. It is part of your free membership inside of coachingforleaders.com. If you haven't set that up, just go over to the homepage at coachingforleaders.com and you can set that up. And I was thinking today as I was recording this conversation with Roy and I got on the line, we were on camera, we were talking, and then when we started recording, we turned off cameras until we finished the recording, and then we did a little bit of a debrief and turned cameras back on. I almost never record podcast interviews on camera. There's an important reason why, and it comes down to communication and meeting people where they are. I talked about that in detail in a recent journal entry inside of Coaching for Leaders Plus. If you're looking for a bit more insight from me, a little bit of the behind the scenes, a little bit more from our members' perspective, and a lot more on the how-to behind the things you hear every week here on the podcast, I'd invite you to discover Coaching for Leaders Plus. You can find out more by going over to coachingforleaders.plus, one of the many benefits inside of there. Coaching for Leaders is edited by Andrew Kroger. Production support is provided by Sierra Priest. I hope you'll join me next Monday for a conversation with Will Guidara, author of Unreasonable Hospitality, a New York Times bestseller. We're going to be talking about the power of leadership through hospitality. Join me for that conversation with Will. Have a great week and see you back Monday.